You notice blank skin while friends compare fresh ink under cafe lighting. You scroll photos, faces change, styles shift, memories blur across months. You feel slightly out of sync, not judging, just quietly separate. People assume hesitation, fear, or a lack of passion beneath your calm surface. You rarely explain yourself because explanations invite misinterpretation anyway. You sense others reading absence as indecision, or worse, emotional distance. Nothing dramatic happens, yet something subtle always lingers between conversations. But here's the twist. What looks like avoidance can be a deep psychological orientation toward time. What seems empty can reflect an unusually vivid relationship with your future self. Permanence feels heavier when you imagine decades, not just moments. Research suggests most adults feel meaningfully different every 10 years. Yet cultural narratives celebrate locking identity into visible, permanent symbols. Very few conversations leave room for people who resist that logic quietly, and almost no one asks what that resistance might actually reveal. Long-term time perspective and the perception of permanence. People often say you can always reinterpret a tattoo later. They frame permanence as flexible, assuming future you will adapt easily. That explanation sounds reasonable, even comforting on the surface, but you instinctively project yourself far ahead, not just months or years. You imagine future routines, values, relationships, even emotional thresholds shifting. Permanence feels heavier when you simulate those distant versions vividly. This is where temporal discounting quietly stops working the usual way. You do not minimize future consequences to favor present emotion. Instead, the future stays psychologically close, almost uncomfortably present. Future self-continuity shapes how real tomorrow feels inside your decisions. Your future self feels like a real person you must answer to. So an irreversible mark becomes a long conversation, not a spontaneous statement. You picture standing decades later, carrying meanings you cannot yet predict. The image is not frightening, just strangely unresolved. For you, restraint becomes a form of respect toward that unknown self. This does not mean you fear change or emotional commitment. It means you acknowledge how dramatically people transform across life stages. Not everyone experiences that transformation with equal psychological distance. Some people live comfortably anchored in the present moment. Others, like you, live partially in a future already emotionally inhabited. Neither orientation is superior, just differently weighted. So permanence asks more from you than from most, and you quietly decide not to answer yet. Regret avoidance and preventive decision-making. Logic. People assume you fear regret in a dramatic, anxious way. They imagine endless overthinking, second-guessing, emotional paralysis. That assumption misses the texture of your decision-making entirely. You do not catastrophize imagined mistakes. You simply simulate outcomes before committing to irreversible paths. The calculation feels calm, almost procedural, rather than emotional. Anticipated regret acts like a silent filter in your choices. You mentally visit the version of yourself who might feel misaligned later. If that future discomfort feels plausible, you pause without drama. Loss aversion quietly amplifies what cannot be undone. The potential loss is not money or social approval, it is internal coherence, the feeling of staying aligned with yourself. A tattoo is not just addition for you, it is the loss of optionality, the closing of a door. You notice that cost more clearly than the symbolic gain. Others prioritize the meaning gained in the present. You prioritize minimizing future psychological friction. Both logics are internally consistent, just differently oriented. This does not make you indecisive. It makes you preventive rather than reactive. You choose paths with the lowest long-term psychological maintenance. Sometimes that choice looks like inaction from the outside. Internally, it feels like quiet conservation. Personal identity without fixed symbols. Many people anchor identity through visible, stable symbols. They use marks to declare continuity in who they believe they are. That strategy offers clarity both internally and socially. You construct identity in a more fluid, internal way. Your sense of self updates through experiences, not inscriptions. Meaning lives in patterns, memories, and evolving narratives. Self-concept. Clarity does not require external reinforcement for you. You know who you are without needing to display it permanently. That clarity feels portable, adaptable, and intentionally unfinished. Identity flexibility allows you to shift without erasing yourself. You do not feel fragmented when interests, values, or aesthetics change. You feel responsive, like a system designed for adaptation. A tattoo could freeze one chapter into a permanent headline. You prefer letting chapters exist, without titles carved into skin. The story feels more honest when it stays editable. This does not mean you reject symbolism altogether. You simply internalize symbols rather than wearing them. Meaning feels safer when it can evolve quietly inside you. Some people need mirrors to recognize themselves. You recognize yourself through motion, not reflection. And that difference rarely gets named. Distance from social norms of self-expression. Modern culture treats visibility as proof of authenticity. Expression is expected to be external, legible, and immediately interpretable. If something matters, it should be seen. You feel that pressure even when no one states it directly. Questions arrive casually, disguised as curiosity or encouragement. They assume expression must leave a visible trace. Social signaling frames the body as a communication surface. Marks become shorthand, compressing identity into readable symbols. You sense how quickly symbols become assumptions. Impression management asks you to curate how others perceive you. A tattoo would speak before you do, permanently. You hesitate to let a symbol narrate you without context. Your distance is not rebellion. It is selective participation. You prefer ambiguity over premature definition. You notice how symbols flatten complexity for convenience. They make social navigation easier, but internally less precise. You resist being summarized that efficiently. This does not mean you reject expression. You simply choose slower, situational forms of it, forms that unfold in conversation, behavior, and time. Social norms reward visibility. You quietly choose legibility on your own terms. Value systems regarding the body and personal control. For many people, the body is a canvas. Alteration feels like ownership made visible. Control is expressed through transformation. You relate to control differently. The body feels more like a boundary than a billboard. Something neutral, not empty, just intentionally unmarked. Body ownership, for you, includes the right to not modify. Agency shows up as restraint as much as action. Control does not need evidence. Personal autonomy means deciding what stays untouched. You notice how rarely that option is celebrated. Doing nothing is often mistaken for passivity. Your body holds function, sensation, and presence. Meaning does not need to be added to justify it. Existence already feels sufficient. This does not imply rigidity or moral judgment. Others personalize their bodies meaningfully. You simply experience autonomy through preservation. The absence of alteration is still a choice, one that aligns with how you experience control. Quietly, consistently, without performance. Internalized memory and meaning without inscription. Some people externalize memory to keep it alive. Dates, names, symbols anchor experiences against forgetting. The body becomes an archive. You trust memory differently. Experiences live as internal narratives, not physical markers. They resurface through feeling, not visibility. Narrative identity shapes how you remember yourself. Meaning organizes through stories you revisit mentally. No single symbol holds the entire weight. Symbolic meaning. Internalization keeps significance fluid. Memories shift as you reinterpret them over time. You allow that evolution without fixing it in ink. A tattoo would freeze one interpretation of a moment. You prefer letting meaning breathe, change tone, soften edges. Memory feels more honest when it remains movable. This does not mean you forget easily. You remember deeply, but privately. Your archive lives inside, not on display. What matters stays active through reflection, not inscription. And that choice often goes unnoticed. Some people mark meaning outwardly, others carry it inward, revising it as life unfolds. Neither approach owns truth. Culturally, permanence is framed as courage, visibility is mistaken for depth, silence is read as absence. But restraint can be intentional, and meaning does not require witnesses. Identity can remain valid without inscription. You are not undecided. You are oriented differently toward time, control, and selfhood. Not everything meaningful needs to be made permanent. That thought alone changes how a life can be lived. So the question lingers, how much of who you are must be fixed to be real? If this way of thinking feels familiar, consider staying here, quietly exploring it together.